I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like Live. Again, I'm Jared Ball, your host. Happy again to be here. Thank you very much for joining me, whether you're here live, whether you're catching this later. Definitely appreciate you stopping through. Please make sure you've signed up to get everything at imixwhatilike.org, imixwhatilike.org, so you don't miss all that I and my colleagues and comrades do beyond just this live stream. And at I Mix What I Like for all of your relevant social media. And we have a lot coming up on the platform, so I won't belabor the point right now, that is, but we have please make sure you're signed up, subscribed, all of that. Please also like, share, and invite people to join the channel. Again, we have a big announcement coming very soon about an expansion project, so you don't want to miss that either, and all of your support will help with that as well. All right, that said, I'm very excited to be joined by our next guest. Honestly, for me at least, this is years in the making. Just never been able to for whatever reason, on whatever platform I was involved with, able to get our schedules synced up. But I'm very happy that we're able to do that today because for any number of reasons, I think our next guest has a lot of important insights. So let's turn to him right now. And that guest, of course, is Norman G. Finkelstein, who received his PhD from Princeton University in the Politics Department in 1988. He is the author of 10 books that have been translated into 50 foreign editions, including The Holocaust Industry, Reflections on the Exploitation of Jewish Suffering, and his most recently published GAZA, an Inquest into its Martyrdom. Professor Finkelstein, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining me. And
thank you for having me.
So there's so many things I wanted to get to and have been wanting to ask you about for years. So so to you and anyone else who's tuning in or who will see this later, forgive if this is a little bit disjointed and maybe out of order, but and I'll invite others to maybe some of it will come out in this conversation, but I'll invite others to please go and check Professor Finkelstein's website and so much more of his work to get more of the context and we'll be able to get to here. But I did want to start with something, Professor Finkelstein, that I saw was that you posted on your website very recently that actually speaks to one of the reasons why for so many years I have wanted to have this chance to talk with you. And it speaks to something about what I certainly appreciate is I think exists throughout your scholarship and your lectures and discussions of your work. But it's something here, and I'm just going to read the first paragraph of this because, again, it speaks to something that I've really appreciated about your approach, the vibe you bring to your work. And it says, and it's in your correspondence section here, or actually it's titled "A Correspondent Queries Finkelstein," and it starts by saying, "Dear Professor Finkelstein, I finished the first lecture in a series of 10 given by you. It's about fascism and speech and John Stuart Mill. Near the end of the lecture, you spoke about courage and what it means to be brave with your decisions to speak. You told a story. Riding home on the subway, a homeless man and 3 younger gentlemen got on at the same time. The homeless person smelled terrible, and the other 3 openly mocked him for this. You immediately sympathized for the homeless man, for he didn't choose to smell terrible, and the 3 other men were tormenting a man whose life was already filled with pain. So you imagine another scene following it. What if the homeless man took a bottle and smashed it open, then attacked the 3 jeering men, possibly killing 1 or 2 of them? You say you would not feel sympathetic for the victims. You would not think that their teasing was particularly brave. You would not, quote, shed a single tear for them," end quote. He goes on to basically question how you could be such a good man and reach that conclusion. And yet for me, when I read it and hear you speak and talk about your work, it comports perfectly with my own view of the world. And I feel that it is the core kindness and goodness of your character that leads you to that conclusion. But anyway, I wanted to just start with that and invite you to maybe talk a little bit about that story and how it does or how you think it might or might not reflect an approach to the work or to your presentation of your work in the work that you do?
Well, actually, I remember the story well. I mean, it's vivid in my recollection, I should say. It occurred right after the Gulf War in 1991. And there was, as you might recall, I don't know, you're, I guess, in your 50s, so...
well, 49, but I was actually sent to that Gulf War as serving a sentence in the Navy, as I describe it. So, yeah, I am familiar with it a little bit.
So you might recall there was a kind of arrogance of Americans after the Gulf War, a lot of smug self-satisfaction, and you felt it a lot in the way people were carrying themselves. And so when those three young men entered the subway car and started to mock this homeless person, it just really irked me. What I was watching, for better or for worse, and it's not to make any profit off of it. My memories, my mental framework is always what my parents endured during World War II. My parents passed through the Nazi Holocaust. Both of them were in what was called the Warsaw Ghetto. After the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto was repressed by the Nazis, my parents were deported to Majdanek concentration camp. Excuse me. And then my father ended up in Auschwitz, and he was in the Auschwitz Death March. My mother ended up in 2 slave labor camps. She was liberated by the Russians, my father by the Americans. Excuse me.
It's all right, Afia.
And I always, one second, hold on.
That's all right, no problem.
Excuse me.
It's the beauty of live, and we can certainly withstand this brief break. I appreciate this, Brother David. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for reading the book and feeling it was an afternoon well spent. And I want to put this up again because I suggest. Anyway, yeah, go ahead. We'll come back to that. Go ahead.
I remember my mother telling me a story after the war. They were the only 2 survivors in their family, so I never had any aunts, any uncles, grandparents, anything. We were just 5 people in the world: my mother, my father, and my 2 siblings and myself. And I remember my mother telling me a story. I grew up in a lower middle-class Jewish neighborhood. It was a very ambitious Jewish neighborhood. Everybody was out to conquer the world. And as it happened, many people from my high school did conquer the world. My high school, James Madison High School, New York, its graduates include Charles Schumer, the current Senate Majority Leader. He was about 4 years ahead of me. Bernie Sanders was in my high school. He was many more years ahead of me. Judge Judy Scheinlin was, yes, she was in my high school. Stanley Kaplan of the preparatory courses, Stanley Kaplan, Kaplan SAT, PM, he was in my high school. 5 Nobel laureates were in my high school. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was in my high school. Chris Rock was in my high school, though he dropped out after 2 years. Well, it was a very ambitious neighborhood. It was all Jewish, except Chris Rock. And it had all the good and the bad of being brought up in that class and in that ethnicity. One of, I guess you would call, there was a lot of ambition, which is good. After a certain point, it becomes bad. Let me tell you. After a certain point, ambition becomes Cassius from Julius Caesar, that lean and hungry look. So it's not all good, but it wasn't all bad either. The point I want to get to is, if you grew up in a neighborhood like that, your biggest investment was in the house. And so if you invested a lot in your house, you're absolutely obsessed by property values. Everything is property values, property values, property values. And in my neighborhood, it was all white, all Jewish. I think there may have been 2 Catholic families in the whole neighborhood. If a black person moved into the neighborhood, property values plummeted. I'm going to be frank with you, they plummeted. So there was a real unspoken but very palpable racism in the neighborhood. And one of the manifestations of that racism was no blacks allowed, no black people allowed. Now, in fact, I had a friend of mine, her name was Signe Poland. Her family moved out of the neighborhood and they sold the house to a black family. Well, the neighbors were so appalled that they organized this mass car caravan to the new house where Signe's family moved just to protest it. Oddly enough, I wasn't so sure of the details, and we're talking about 60 years ago. I wasn't so sure of the details. And a few months ago, of all things, Signe Poland wrote me out of the blue. And I asked her, is that what happened? Am I right? Is my memory playing tricks on me? She said, no tricks. That's absolutely what happened. So I know this is a long detour, but I'll get to you now. I'll get to the point now. Well, in my neighborhood, they were planning to build a homeless shelter. Homeless shelter means non-Jewish people, mostly black. It means property values plummeting. And my mother and father were as obsessed by property values as the next person. I'm not going to lie about them. I thought and still think the world of them. I owe a lot, certainly a majority, maybe more, to them as to how I turned out, for better or worse. But on the property values issue, I knew they weren't terrific. So I once asked my mother, kind of feeling her out, because I didn't really want to directly touch this question. I said, somehow, what do you think about the homeless shelter they want to build? She said, build it. Build it. I was totally shocked. My mother, Ms. Property Values, or Mrs. Property Values back then, she says, build the shelter. I said, why do you say that, Mom? She said, because you never know where you'll be tomorrow. You never know where you'll be tomorrow. She didn't have to say another word to me. I understood exactly what she was trying to communicate. She grew up in the Polish middle class. They were from Warsaw, my mother and father. The Polish middle class. She went to a private Jewish school. She was president of her class and president of her school. She then went to Warsaw University to study mathematics. She was not only very smart, she was very cultured. She knew Latin, she knew classical music, she didn't know art, I don't think, but music, language, culture. She was the whole 9 yards, you know? Then what do you say? She used to say, I went to concerts every Friday night. When I came home from school, I threw away my books and I went ice skating. And then, what do you know? Suddenly, she's confined to a ghetto. Disease is everywhere. The streets are strewn with dead bodies of people who either got typhus or They were starved to death. The hunger was the most vivid memory of my mother. She didn't talk much about the camps, but she talked a lot about the hunger. The hunger, the death, everybody stank. Everybody reeked. Everybody reeked to high heaven. My mother was, I don't know the details. I don't really know the details because we never discussed it as over lunch or over dinner. You just got a little anecdote here, a little anecdote there. But it seems that her immediate family seems to have been exterminated very quickly, early in the war. And then she was dependent on 1-2 degrees removed from her immediate family. They did not help her. She communicated that to me indirectly, but clearly. She said to me, if you know anything about the Warsaw Ghetto, they built all of these what were called bunkers. They were basically like tunnels, catacombs throughout the whole ghetto to protect themselves from the Nazis. And she said to me, I once ended up in the bunker of the truck drivers. They were apparently a strong union there. The truck drivers and the prostitutes, she said. And she said to me, they actually treated me the best. They actually treated me the best. My mother was a complete snob. She knew she was smart and she made sure everybody else knew it. But they treated her the best. The prostitutes and the truck drivers. You never know where you'll be tomorrow. And that's what I saw with those 3 kids, those 3 young men, when they were lording it over the guy who was homeless and stinking. My mother was homeless and stinking. She was reeking to high heaven. I remember her friend told me, I don't know, she said, what happened to your mother? Before the war, she was always laughing. She said, but right after the war, when I saw her, she lost all her hair and she couldn't speak for 3 months. She lost her voice. It's really, if you knew my mother, losing her voice is a strange thing. But you never know whether you're going to end up that way. So I always remember that. And I had a correspondence with that young man who sent me the letter. And I said, I never said I wanted them dead. I did not say that. If I believed it, I would say it. And sometimes I do feel it. You know, my mother told me the story in the Warsaw Ghetto. People don't really understand, not that they ought to or have an obligation to, but they don't really understand how this whole system worked. Jews never saw a German like in the Warsaw Ghetto. Everything was done through Jewish collaborators. The Germans would occasionally, they would come in a car into the ghetto. But generally, it was all done through what was called the Judenrat, the Jewish councils. It was all Jewish collaborators. And when the resistance broke out to the Nazi extermination plans in the ghetto, the first thing my mother remembered was they shot down the Jewish lieutenant of the police. The Jewish lieutenant of the police. He was laying in the ground, and the resistance put a sign next to him. The sign said, you lived like a dog, you'll die like a dog. And my mother always repeated those lines. And my mother was an absolute pacifist. Absolute pacifist. She said, I prefer 100 years of evolution to 1 year of revolution. She was an absolute pacifist. However, you live like a dog, you die like a dog. I never said I wanted to see those 3 kids killed or in comparable situations. What I said was, if that homeless person had smashed the bottle and killed them, I wouldn't shed a tear. I won't shed a tear. You play with fire, you get fire. You play with fire, you get fire. Let that teach others a lesson. So that's the story. That's how I see the world.
No, I appreciate it. And
that's
no,
how I felt with Charlie Hebdo when the Muslims killed several of them. You want to sit around and mock those who have had to live with mockery their whole lives, and you want to pretend how heroic and courageous you are, and then after they're killed, I'm supposed to pity them? No pity. Just as I have no pity for Julius Streicher, the editor of Der Stürmer, the Nazi publication, which was notorious for its Jewish caricatures. Now, I do not believe he should have been hung. He was one of the defendants at Nuremberg. I do not believe he should have been hung. However, because first of all, I'm pretty much a free speech absolutist, so he was an editor of a newspaper. No, he shouldn't have been hung, in my opinion. However, that he was hung, you're not going to see tears coming down my eyes. It ain't going to happen. You know, you want to sit around, edit a newspaper, mocking people who are in their last breath, who are being systematically destroyed and exterminated, and then you think I'm going to feel sorry for you if you get capital punishment? No, you're not going to hear it from me. It ain't going to happen, because for me to suddenly become like that, it would be a betrayal of everything I learned growing up in my home. Now, my parents said things that, in my opinion, now were wrong. A lot of their opinions, in my opinion, were wrong. However, the basic moral structure they imparted to me, I think, was correct. And to repudiate it would be to repudiate my whole being the last 67 years. And I'm not about to do it. I'm not about to do it.
No, right on. The reason I was drawn to that story is because, as I said, to me, that vibe, that ethic, that attitude runs throughout your work and the presentation of your work. And I have always loved it. And appreciated that. And having been homeless myself and been one to experience smelling like that, I promise you, had I been particularly at that point in my life, had I been the man they were making fun of, a bottle would have been broke and there would have been something. You would have been put in that position where it wouldn't have been a hypothetical. You
live and learn in life. I live on Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. It's a very long boulevard. It stretches about 5 miles, and it has a lot of benches. It's all benches along. It's very nice, humane, civilized. And there are a lot of homeless people on the benches along Ocean Parkway. I know one guy, and occasionally I talk to him, I chat with him. One day I see him, he's lying flat down on the bench reading a book. So I walk over and I say, so what are you reading? He said to me, it's a Swedish mystery novelist. I said, oh, really? You read Swedish mystery novels? He says, yeah. I said to him, so, uh, you like reading? He says, yeah, but he said, I said, what did you major? Did you go to school? He said, yeah, I went to college. I said, what did you major in? He said, physics. I said, oh, really? Majored in physics. Okay, that's pretty good. I said, you know what? Since you majored in physics, I'm going to, I went to Princeton, so I'm going to, no, I said, I'm going to contact Einstein. He says, you can't contact Einstein. He died in 1955 and he was at Princeton. What do you know about Princeton? And the more I talked to him, the more I realized he's a really smart guy. I don't mean like just street smarts. I mean like this guy is a very educated guy. And he had no legs. He slept on the subway platform one day and he rolled over and he lost both his legs. And he's in very bad shape. But he's a very impressive guy. You know,
look, like you said, look. I didn't really mean for us to spend this much time on this, but you know, the reality is that to your point, I don't think most people, especially if they haven't experienced it, realize how quickly and easily it is to slip into homelessness and how hard it is once you're there to get out of it. Anyway, but you know, so I that story resonated with me, and so there's another thing that I wanted to raise with you that's a little bit, I think, I don't know, perhaps disjointed in terms of an interview with you about your work, but there was something that for years I've been wanting to talk with you about, because and I make reference to it all the time, that in your book, The Holocaust Industry, there's a part, I mean, the book itself deserves its own, you know, all of your books deserve their own series of conversations, but the one point I want to raise quickly from that is that in describing the way, forgive this over some summation, in as you talk about the ways in which Jews or certain segments of the Jewish population ripping off the Holocaust survivors, you know, and in that process, and creating the whole, you know, approach of accusing people of anti-Semitism if they raise criticisms of anything that Israel is doing or anything. In that process, and describing the history and the process and the background of all of that, there's two things that you raise in terms of the way that this approach or the development of this approach negatively impacted relationships with Black communities. And I admit, you know, on a personal level, my mother being a Jew, my father being a Black man, my grandmother being raised in what was then Palestine, and her family being pushed out because of their affiliation with Palestinians and the criticisms of Zionism. There's so many you know, and then coming together with my father and have, and then my own recognition of this, of the mythologies of what is said about the relationship between Black people and Jews and what is the reality. And so this particular segment of the book really piqued my interest, because you don't dwell on it, but you do talk a little bit about the ways in which this sort of desire among certain segments of Jews to rip off the Holocaust survival struggle and the reparations movement negatively impact relationships with Black communities, some of which I think you touched on already. But specifically, in terms of this issue of reparations, a lot of Black people in this country and around the world are advocates of reparations. And one of the things that I've said in conversations with, when the routine comparison to Jews being compensated comes up, is that I often encourage people to read your work and to say, look, before we make these one-to-one comparisons, to just say, well, the Jews got it, we should get it too. We should look more carefully at what happened with that process. It's not a process I would think Black people would want to replicate. And I think that while you're not here and in that work to give lessons to Black people trying to get reparations, there is something to be said, maybe a lesson I think that could be learned from any group who again want reparations, deserve reparations, and then want to make comparisons to Jews who have been said to have gotten them. So I did want to ask you a little bit about that, and if there's anything you would want to say about that, please do. I would certainly appreciate it. Want to hear.
Okay. That's a large question because it has many components. Mm-hmm. I'll try to boil it down. By the way, just tell me when it's 6 o'clock because I have another appointment and I don't want to miss it. So,
all right. So we only have 30 minutes left. I thought we had a little more time than that, but my apologies.
No,
we got less.
Jared, we'll become friends after this. And when you have spare time, you'll just call me up and say, "Hey, Norm, how about coming on the show tomorrow?" And 9 times out of 10, I'll say, "Yeah, that's fine." So we don't have to worry about the finitude of time.
Okay, great.
We'll make everything work as time unfolds. I have a soft spot in my heart for HCBUs.
HBC, right? I do teach at Morgan State. Right.
Because it was the HCBU that incubated and also protected professionally W.E.B. Du Bois, mm-hmm. And I have a soft spot in my heart for that. He did his greatest work at Atlanta University. There's no question about that. And if it weren't,
we'd have to talk about his relationship to Howard later, though. But that's a whole.
If there weren't HCBUs, there wouldn't have been the W.E.B. Well, there was the crisis period. But apart from the crisis period, if there weren't an HCBU, there wouldn't have been a W.E.B. Du Bois, because no white university would touch him. That's just a fact. Okay, so don't worry about time.
Okay.
About this issue of reparations, some of the things I'm about to say you'll agree with. Some of you, what I'm about to say, you won't agree with. So we'll just agree to disagree. There are 2 aspects to the reparations. Number 1, from whom they were demanded, and number 2, who were the beneficiaries. So let's start with number 1. The reparations were demanded from several European countries, virtually all European countries, but the main ones were Switzerland and Germany. So what I call the Holocaust industry and the Holocaust hucksters. The Holocaust hucksters first went after Switzerland. And they claimed that Jews before World War II, when they saw the rise of Hitler, they deposited their savings in Swiss bank accounts for safekeeping. And the claim was that there were billions and billions of dollars belonging to Jews who, having been exterminated during the Nazi Holocaust, the money was not returned to their next of kin after the war. So these Swiss banks were said to have benefited hugely from the Nazi Holocaust, having accepted the deposits of Jews, and then after the war, not giving up those deposits to the legitimate heirs of the Jews who passed. Is there any truth to that? Well, Raoul Hilberg, who was the world's leading authority in the Nazi Holocaust, he breaks it down very simply. He says, number 1, contrary to all mythology, Jews before World War II were overwhelmingly poor. They lived in what were called shtetls, little villages in Eastern Europe. If you want to know what a shtetl was, you go and watch the movie or go to the Broadway show, Fiddler on the Roof. These were very primitive, very simple, poor villages in Eastern Europe. That's where the Jews lived. Now, if you know Fiddler on the Roof, the signature song of Fiddler on the Roof is when Tevye, played originally on Broadway by Zero Mostel, who was, by the way, blacklisted during that. He was a communist. The song goes, "If I were a rich man, Lord, who made the lion and the lamb, would it break some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man?" What's my point? Did you notice he said, if I were a rich man? It was a dream because they were all poor. There was no Swiss bank accounts. One of my brothers was very wealthy at a certain point. Did he have a Swiss bank account? No, he didn't. Very few people have Swiss bank accounts. And you want to tell me all these Jews in Eastern Europe, they had Swiss bank accounts and they deposited their millions in the Swiss banks. Number two, let's say you had money. Let's say, for argument's sake, you had money. You lost it in a stock market crash. That's what happened in 1929. Everybody who had savings lost it. Number three, let's assume you're one of the rare individuals who didn't lose it. Well, guess what? If you know anything about the Nazi Holocaust, Jews who had a lot of money, they got out. They bought their way out. There were ways to buy your way out. The wealthy Jews bought their way out. After the war, they went up to the teller. There were no ATMs back then. They went up to the teller. They said, "I'm XYZ. I'm Mr. Rothschild. I'm Mr. This. I'd like to withdraw my money." The money was withdrawn. So this whole thing with the Swiss bank accounts, it was all complete and total nonsense. But these Holocaust hucksters, they came up with an idea. We're going to go around saying, we're doing all this for needy Holocaust victims. And then they said, you know those fat Swiss bankers. And of course, everybody hates bankers, or ought to. So they played these two populist cards, the poor, needy Holocaust victims versus the Nazi-like fat Swiss bankers. And it was all a theater. They got, the background was this crook named Edgar Bronfman of the liquor empire, the Bronfman liquor empire. He became president of the World Jewish Congress. He then joined forces with this other crook, Rabbi Israel Singer. And Bronfman was one of the biggest individual supporters of Clinton. And there was a quid pro quo between Clinton and Bronfman. I helped you get into office, and you support my Holocaust reparations racket. Whether Clinton actually knew it was a racket, I'm not so sure. Not that he's an honest guy. He's an extremely smart guy. But whether he actually knew it was a racket, I don't know. In any case, so then they end up, what happened was the controllers at the city and state level, they had huge pension funds invested in the Swiss banks. And they threatened to withdraw all the pension funds from the Swiss banks. And that's what finally brought the Swiss bankers to heel. I won't go into all the details, but that's the essential picture. So after they did that, the actual survivors of the shakedown of the Swiss banks and then of the German companies, but I don't have time now to go into the German companies, the actual survivors never saw a dime. These organizations like the World Jewish Congress, the Jewish Claims Conference, they They all kept the money for themselves. They didn't give a nickel to the actual survivors. You know, just to give you an example, Germany paid out reparations to the tune before the Holocaust racket, before it, between 80 and 120 billion dollars. Okay? The figures vary between 80 and 120 billion dollars. Now, the fact of the matter is, I'm sorry, Jared, but everything I say has a book behind it. That's the problem. It's very hard to condense it. There were very few survivors of the Nazi Holocaust because it was a systematic, methodical, assembly-like, factory-like extermination of the Jews. It really was very efficient. And by the end of the war, the estimate is there were less than 100,000 survivors. Of those 100,000, by the 1990s, when the whole Holocaust compensation racket began, most of them were dead. I buried my mother, I buried my father in 1995. I knew all of my parents' friends. My parents never assimilated to America. All of their friends were from either pre-war or met after the war. All of them were already dead before the Holocaust reparations racket even began. All this talk about we're doing this for needy Holocaust victims, Holocaust survivors, what are you talking about, Holocaust survivors? Almost all of them are dead. They made up these numbers of survivors. They made up the whole thing was a complete fraud and racket. In any case, as I said, the Germans paid out between 80 and 120 billion dollars before the Holocaust compensation racket began. Their payments began around 1951. You know what my mother got from all of the money? She got $3,000. $3,000. Because all the Jewish organizations stole it. They stole it and they kept it all for themselves. So,
out of that 80 to 100 billion dollars,
even 120 billion. The estimates vary.
Man.
And how many survivors were there? So if you do the math, between 80 and 120 billion, and there just aren't that many survivors. Well, you can figure it out.
Been a bunch of millionaires all over the place.
Yeah, you can figure it out. Yeah, a lot of people did become millionaires from the racket. You know who became a millionaire? There's this civil libertarian, former head of the ACLU, this Saint Bert Newborn. He's at NYU now, NYU Law School. Saint Bert Newborn. So Saint Bert Newborn, he was one of the leading attorneys for the Holocaust reparations for needy Holocaust victims. And his daughter had been a rabbinical student, and she died prematurely of a heart attack. So he went around saying, Bert's very pious, Bert. He went around saying, I'm doing this in memory of my daughter, pro bono. I'm doing it in memory of my daughter, pro bono. Well, you know how much the pro bono Holocaust huckster charged? He made $10 million.
Wow.
$10 million. $10 million. He was billing in 1996, the pro bono Holocaust lawyer. He was billing at $700 an hour. He once billed for one day, he billed for 30.5 hours.
Wow.
The pro bono.
In one day, 30 hours.
Yeah. So, yeah. Actually, if you Google it, Bert Newborn, New York Times, Holocaust lawyer, They had an editorial. The Times was so appalled by this that they made a separate editorial for Burt Newborn because he's such a crook. So, what do I conclude from this? I conclude a couple of things. And here you may not agree with me. First of all, I have no doubt that African Americans have a legitimate claim over several hundred years of slavery, then followed by effective, de facto forms of slavery in the form of Jim Crow, and massive exploitation. Can you devise an effective formula for deciding who will, I'm speaking on an individual level, who will and who won't be eligible for these reparations? In my opinion, impossible. It's impossible to come up with an effective formula. I saw what they did with the Holocaust reparations. They started to balloon this definition of a Holocaust survivor till it had nothing to do with anybody. Then they started inventing terms like second generation Holocaust survivor. That's supposed to be me. You understand? I'm a second generation. If I ever went up to my mother and said, Mom, I wish you'd show me some sympathy. I'm a second generation Holocaust survivor. She would have smacked the shit out of me, and rightfully so. So, I'm very serious. I'm very serious. Second generation Holocaust survivor. So, first of all, I don't think you can come up with a definition that would make distribution possible. What's going to happen is the definition is going to balloon. It's going to be all gray areas about who is and who isn't deserving of compensation. And then you know what's going to happen. Now, here you don't want to agree with me. You don't have to agree with me. We don't have to agree. It's all going to end up in the pockets of people like Al Sharpton. They're going to get all the money. Just like the Jewish organizations, Al will be the first one online, National Action Network, the Democratic Party knows he's useful, and they'll give him the money. No, you're laughing. Hey,
I'm laughing because this is
exactly what happened here.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened here with the Jews. The survivors didn't see a dime.
No, I'm laughing because
black people will never see a penny of it. They'll never see a penny of it. If Jesse Jackson's not around, his son will figure out a way to get the money.
If he's not back in jail himself?
What?
If Jesse's son is not back in jail himself?
Yeah.
Listen, no, I'm laughing because go ahead.
Holocaust reparations, Kamala Harris.
Wow.
So,
listen, no, I'm only laughing.
I say stay away from that stuff. Mm-hmm. Fight for what is clearly, in your interest and which is palpable. Fight for jobs. Fight for housing. We don't fight for these reparations. It's crap.
No, the reason I'm laughing is because selfishly you're confirming that I've been more or less correct in my interpretation of your work and my application of it in other circles. I mean, that has been largely how I've been trying to argue. And in fact, my own argument around reparations for descendants of African people is really a broad approach to revolutionizing the entire society, as opposed to focusing specifically on reparations. So me personally, I have no particular disagreement with what you said. And I would only encourage people who have not read that particular work to read The Holocaust Industry, to really get some more of the details as to why you're concluding the way you are. It is based on meticulous and incredibly well done research. So
I'm going to have to get off.
That's fine.
But I want to just tell you,
yeah,
this thing touches me very much, because I told you my mother got $3,000, and from a very young age, I was kind of not by my will. I became my mother's lawyer. she knew I had a certain way with words, and I was quote unquote educated. And so I fought for her reparations. I fought and fought and fought. I used to go down to the office of the Jewish Claims Conference. I knew all the principles, and they couldn't disregard me because I had the Holocaust credential. They knew my parents were the real.
Well, you're a second generation Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, but you know what, Jared? Here's the deal, as Joe Biden likes to say. Mm-hmm. There are real and fake second generation. My parents were the real deal. There were very few survivors. My parents were among them. And everybody who hated me, they knew that. And they didn't know quite what to do with it. So I fought very hard. And my mother once said to me, she said, my mother liked money. I'm not going to deny it. She liked money. But she said to me, you know, it's not the money. It's the fact that all these people are getting money, validating their suffering, and giving me $3,000 as if to say I didn't suffer. It was so horrible what these Holocaust hucksters did. Their filthy, sordid schemes to enrich themselves from the suffering of my parents and all the others who perished. They're ghouls, they're grave robbers. And I really don't. I don't want to see Black people go down that path, because it's only the crooks and shysters among you who will end up profiting from it. My dear friend from 30, 40 years ago now, Larry Hem, he talks about reparations. I wish I never had a conversation with him about it, but I really wish he wouldn't bring that up. I really, do you know why people like Ta-Nehisi Coates get away with the whole reparations thing? Do you know why? Because the powers that be, like Jeff Goldberg, the editor-in-chief at Atlantic, when Ta-Nehisi Coates was there, they know it's all nonsense. They know reparations will never happen. And therefore, they let people like Goldberg say these things because, we need reparations because it sounds so woke. So, when Jeffrey Goldberg's at Martha's Vineyard, he could talk about running this cutting edge article on reparations. And then the New York Times has a magazine article last year on reparations. And then I opened up the New York Review of Books this week, an article on reparations, because they all want to look so woke and so hip and so cutting edge when they know it's not going to happen. They know it's not going to happen. That's why they run the articles. If they talked about, what Bernie talked about, jobs. No, we don't want to hear about jobs. We don't want to hear about jobs. That's not hip. That's not woke. Let's just talk about things that sound real hip and real woke and which are completely and totally irrelevant because they'll never happen. Okay. Nice talking to you, John.
All right, man. Thanks again, Professor Finkelstein. I'll be in touch. Thank you very much for joining us. Take care. All right. What can I say? I very much appreciate that visit, and we will definitely take him up on his offer of a follow-up. I only raised 2 or 3 questions. He clearly has a lot to say, and so much of it is appreciated. What I'm going to do, let me quickly see if I can If any folks have any comments or questions, I will try to grab a couple of them and address them if I can. Yeah, absolutely. Beyond Chutzpah was another very insightful book. The whole issue with Alan Dershowitz. Yep, this was him. That was him. Let's see. Yeah, the empathy for the underdog. Absolutely. I remember Craig. Yeah, it's all over the country that Black property is devalued. Or properties devalue once Black people move in. That's all over the country, still going on. And in fact, there is. I thought it would have been out already, but the white paper, pun intended, I guess, that I participated in on the impact of COVID on Black businesses deals a little bit with this question and what's still going on. So as soon as it comes out, which I think is going to be sometime in February, I will obviously talk about it here and look to bring on the principal researchers if possible. But yeah, this stuff is still going on. Let's see what else. Yeah, I was enjoying that part. Ricky, for sure. I'm not even going to front. I mean, I just like his whole attitude. I mean, his whole attitude, which some criticize, I think is perfectly appropriate. Yeah, he had that a little bit backwards. It's HBCUs, not HCBUs. That's all right. Yeah. Yep. If I were a rich man. Yeah, this is a good documentary. And in fact, also, I remember even before I read People's History of the United States as an undergrad in college, the first book I read from Howard Zinn was, I want to say Southern Cross is in the title, but it was about his time as a post-Second World War Jew finding employment in one of the few places he could, which was at HBCUs. More than on reparations, I might disagree with Finkelstein on the overall. Well, anyway, we might disagree about the overall positive relationship between HBCUs and Black radical scholarship, but I certainly appreciate that he has a certain appreciation for it. Yeah, right on. I mean, how many other people got Finkelstein singing in the interviews? No doubt. Thank you, Sister Leah. Appreciate the kind words. Absolutely, David. That thing with reparations was another perfect example of trickle down economics, the fraudulence of it, for sure. What else? Yeah, that's where I'm at. I mean, that's in part where I'm at. And in fact, again, we'll try to talk about it more when we have him back, but it's hard to read a book like The Holocaust Industry and have a lot of positivity about what will happen here for Black people in reparations. And I think largely even what he just said here tonight is correct. I mean, it would be a ploy for a lot of the Sharpton types and Jesse types and all of that. But and I think his explanation as to why there's so much room for this to be discussed is, Sister Marva, I'm always going to have respect and love for you. No question. We will not agree on the ADOS movement, but that's fine too. I have to think that your presence there will have a positive impact on them, and I hope that is the case. But I'm glad you at least appreciated what we were trying to do here, and thanks for coming through for sure. Yeah, I mean, again. And I also appreciate that Finkelstein is not afraid to be disagreeable. I mean, he doesn't feel a need to offer up some soft or fake. I mean, that's what I think. That's I think important and respectable as well. If he believes it, he'll say it, and if he can, if it means disagreement, it means disagreement. So be it. This was it. The Southern Mystique, is that what it was called? Maybe that was it. Maybe it wasn't the cross Southern. Yeah, yeah. That's right. Zen taught at Spelman. That's right. Thank you very much. Like I say, we may relatively have to some a small, but we have as I tell the guests I'm inviting, we have a small but thoughtful audience here. So it's great. Anyway, I appreciate it. Listen, everybody, thank you very much. I think I went through as much as I found here. Thank you very much for coming through. I definitely appreciate it. Many more interviews being scheduled, many more projects being developed and expanded. So please like, share, subscribe, become a member of the channel if you can, and encourage others to do so, because we are, looking to build and do a lot more. And yeah. Oh no doubt. Yeah. No, I hear you, Sister Marva. Like I said, I nothing but love and respect for you. And in fact, at some point, we should have you come on up here and talk about, your view of the world. I would love to do that. It's, in fact, I'll reach out to you shortly and see if we can work that out. But again, one of the things I really appreciate about Finkelstein is that we're not all going to agree, but we don't have to shy away from our disagreements, and we don't have to disagree with hostility. And that's it. I think that's great. And maybe we don't disagree as much as I may think. So anyway, but listen, everybody, I appreciate it. Honestly, I don't know exactly what's coming up next or when. I've lost track of my own calendar, and so many things are in the works and are in the final stages of being fully scheduled. And for the most part, for this, I'm just a one-man operation, so we got to do it as I can get to it. But we're endeavoring to keep it moving and keep the calendar as full as possible. And again, this will be expanding anyway with some colleagues and comrades in the near future anyway. So again, deeply appreciate you all coming through, and look forward to seeing you all the next time here at I Mix What I Like Live. And as always, as Fred Hampton used to say, very soon we're going to have a lot to talk about in terms of Brother Fred too. I thought it might happen today. Couldn't do it today. Oh man, I can't wait. February 12th, Judas and the Black Messiah comes out. It might pose a real challenge to the Vernon philosophy. It might not, but anyway. We're going to get to that. I promise much more on that is coming. In fact, Brother Fred Jr. is one of those that's in this pipeline trying to work out the details. So it is much about. Yeah, I'm knocking over on Mike. I'm amped. I'm amped. It's coming though. So I promise. Anyway, a lot more on that. No, I appreciate you. Thank you very much, and thanks for supporting the channel. Anyway, like Fred Hampton used to say, to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody, and we'll catch you right here next time at I Mix What I Like Live. Thanks, everybody. Peace. Catch you in the whirlwind as well. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like.